Well, it's wonderful to be back here again. I have a fondness for being, whenever I'm asked to give a talk or be with any kind of meditation group, like this, or like when I go to Spirit Rock or other places, there's something about, well, I imagine it's being an old Zen practitioner. You do get a kind, either you get a fondness for meditation or an absolute horror of meditation, depending on how it goes for you. But and I probably experienced a little bit of both. But there's always something that feels almost like kind of like coming home when I come and give a talk to people, a group of people that I know do meditation. And I think something like meditation, I just want to start by saying a few words about it. I think it's, in many ways, I think it's always been important. It's always been powerful. I think in many ways the meditators or those who in the Western tradition they referred it to kind of as a contemplation. The contemplatives of any tradition really are sort of they're like the engine room, you know? It's what keeps things vital, and I think it's also in our spirituality to take time to be in quiet. It's almost, as time goes on, it's becoming more of a radical thing to do, even though it's more socially acceptable, right? When I started out, when did I start out in all this? 35 years ago? Something like that, if not a little more. You know, if you said you meditated, people kind of looked at you weird. Some of you in the audience that have been doing this in a while probably know what I'm talking about. And over time, it's amazing how fast that's changed. In fact, I owe the oddity of meditation to my good fortune of my marriage, is because my sister hooked me up with who is now my wife, Mukti, because we were the only two people in the universe that she knew that meditated. I imagine a fairly good percentage of people nowadays, if they said, do you know anybody that meditates, I think a good percentage of them probably do. And as a teacher, what I appreciate the most about meditation, and certainly being with people who do some of it, is that, you know, in meditation what you really encounter is you encounter your mode of being, your style of being. Because when you meditate, as we just did for 15 minutes, you're stuck with yourself. You know, you're not turning on the internet or checking the phone, or you're not distracting yourselves in the 1,001 ways we can distract ourselves. And we seem to be intent on inventing ever more complicated ways to distract ourselves. But when we sit in meditation, I think if we do it correctly, which is a really big if we do it correctly, what we really do is we encounter ourselves. And we encounter the way we are with challenge, how you are with difficulty will show up, because meditation isn't always easy. You'll see how you encounter when things go your way, when you have nice experience or it's just sort of flowing, and you'll encounter what your relationship with that is. You'll encounter your relationship with being disappointed. So meditation is like this mirror where you get to see how you are in relationship to the whole inward human experience in many ways. Now, I said if we do it correctly, because we can be so intent on trying to sort of meditate in sort of a technique way and trying to do it so perfectly that we won't really be noticing that a whole other part of meditation that's quite apart from the technique is our relationship with what's actually happening in the moment. what our relationship is. If you're too hung up on technique, you're not even paying attention to your relationship with the moment. You're just barreling through trying to make happen what you want to happen. And of course, if you have no technique at all, you tend to just get lost in a sort of, dreamy state of spiritual concepts, I imagine. So, meditation in that sense of the power of confronting yourself, of being with yourself, even for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, can be quite powerful. So most of you probably remember some version of when we very first start to meditate. One of the disquieting things about it is you never knew you were quite that much of a mess before you started. You didn't know your mind talked to itself so incessantly and without your permission, and didn't seem to stop, and didn't even seem to be able to stop sometimes. And you feel things that you might not have wanted to feel, and so you start to notice, I think, especially early on in meditation, how much of your human experience is outside of your control. That can be a little bit disquieting. And if not disquieting, it can certainly lead to a lot of frustration. But it's one of the more powerful aspects of meditation, where when we start to get really, really clear, simply through the observation of your own experience of being, that you start to get really, really clear on what you can do and what you can't do. It's extremely useful to know what you can and can't do. So when I learned how to meditate, I got this idea in my head. I didn't get it from my teachers. I can't blame it on them. I don't know where I got it. But I got this idea in my head that the idea of meditation was to basically not think. Now, it's wonderful when that happens, but I thought that was kind of the ultimate goal of meditation. So I went about trying to not think. Well, if you want to think a lot, try not thinking. You do a lot of thinking about not thinking. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about, right? I was a stubborn case. It took me about 3 years to start to see that approach was not going to work. I had a little help one day from a teacher I did retreats with sometimes, Kwang Roshi up at Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, and I remember the day of when I met him, and I was telling him about this challenge I was having with my mind when I meditated, and he just looked at me kind of quizzical, like a dog, tilted his head a little bit, and he said, if you go to war with your mind, you'd be at war forever. And then he rang the bell, which means our discussion has ended, you can leave now. Which was actually perfect timing, I've seen as a teacher, maybe more important than what we're saying, or it's certainly at least as important as what we're saying, is our timing. And so he had really good timing, and he was not going to let me sit around talking about it. And so I walked out of the room and really in a kind of a stunned state. Now it just seems so obviously simple and clear, but at the time it just seemed so stunning that I was just told that the way I'm going about this, I could go about it forever without actually getting anywhere. It sort of was the beginning of stunning me into a new relationship with my experience. So I wasn't trying to compete with myself. Anybody in this room ever compete with themselves when you're meditating? Or your mind, or whatever it is, So when we finally stop competing with ourselves, or to the extent that we stop competing with ourselves, and we just start to notice our experience, and we start to notice how intertwined our intention is with our experience. Not that our intention can control our experience, because it really can't. Like I said, if you could stop thinking simply because you wanted to, you could just turn your thoughts off like turning the light switch off. We come to see that we really don't have that kind of control. But we can come into a relationship with our experience where many of the fruits of meditation start to come all of their own. And we start to see it's not so much about controlling my experience as it is about realigning my relationship with my experience so that I'm not opposed to what's happening within my experience. Now, that sounds really simple and easy, and in one sense it is. But if you really look at it, how often we are opposed to our own experience of being. Because if we're bored, we try to get involved in something. If we're not feeling one way, we almost immediately try to feel another way. If we're feeling good, we begin to wonder how we can sustain it and all of that. One of the beauties of meditation is we start to see how being even in a subtle or very spiritually a relationship of opposing one's experience doesn't really work. Right? It just creates opposition and conflict. And the beautiful thing about it is that we have everything we need to see all this, because it's just self-evident within one's own experience. It's all self-evident. So I wanted to share with you something. I don't usually do this. I usually don't bring a quote to share. But I bumped into this quote just the last few days, and I liked it so much. When I woke up this morning, I said, I know what I'm going to do with that quote. I'm going to bring it to Sacramento with me. And this is a quote by a wonderful guy, Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk who's no longer with us, but he was a delightful being, and he had a true gift for being able to articulate deep contemplative experience in the most simple form. And it's a real talent, and it's a real art, and he was very good at it. And this is a quick quote from his. Contemplation is precisely the awareness that this I is really not I, and the awakening of the unknown I, that is beyond observation and reflection, and is incapable of commenting upon itself. That's a lot to put in a sentence, isn't it? Contemplation is precisely the awareness that this I is really not I, and the awakening of the unknown I that is beyond observation and reflection, and is incapable of commenting upon itself. So I think you don't need me to tell you about the known I, everything that we think we know about ourselves, that we can imagine and through memory and present time creation of basically our narrative. If you listen to any of the narrative that goes along in your own mind, just when you're walking down the hallway and your narrative's chatting to itself, as if there was an audience, there to hear it, but it chatters to itself. So it's the narrative, the I that's behind the narrative, or that the narrative seems to be suggesting is actually there. It's the I that we get through memory, that's created through this amazing and wonderful gift of language that we have, the ability to conceptualize. All of your evaluations of yourself would be included in the known I. So when he's talking about known in almost any way that you can know yourself. And in a single sentence, Thomas is suggesting that I is not really the true I. That it's the creation, right? It's for the most part, it's there as long as you're thinking it into existence. That I. And that's the I that most of human beings know. That's the I that they not only think, but also feel, because of course we do tend to feel what we think also. And the suggestion here is being made that in contemplation is the Western word for something like meditation. When you're quiet, you're observing your own experience of being. And the I that talks to itself, congratulates or condemns. In the West, mostly condemns itself. All of that. Now, if we're not careful, like our whole spirituality can be held captive from the very first day by that I or that self seeking its own endless fulfillment. And for that self, there really is no final fulfillment, right? It gets everything it wants, and it's happy for a short period of time. Mostly it's happy because it doesn't have to chase getting anything for a little bit. But then that runs out, and it has to start acquiring more, whatever it acquires, from TV sets to spiritual experiences and everything in between.